Welcome to another episode of Draw This. Draw This is a series of videos where I'll randomly generate a word and then draw it for you in real time so that you, the viewer, can follow along. So let's go ahead and get started by randomly generating a word using wordgenerator.net. And the word that I get is flower. So let's go ahead and jump into Corel Painter X3 and we'll start painting. So in Corel Painter, I already have a canvas ready and a sketch layer ready to go, and I'm going to use the Detail Oils brush to go ahead and start sketching in the basic shape of my flower using a kind of a medium gray color because it looks a lot like a pencil. And then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make these petals look like they're being overlapped. We'll have the petals on two separate layers so that there'll be some nice depth to the petals and it won't look so flat. And I wasn't so happy with the center, so I went ahead and redrew that, and now I'm going to go ahead and draw on the stem. I drew one line first to kind of get a feel for the flow of the stem, and then I'm going to draw another one next to it to represent the thickness of the stem. Then I can just go off the canvas. We'll create a new layer for the center of the flower, and we'll name it Center. And then we'll use the scratchboard tool with a yellow-orange color to go ahead and just fill in the center. I'm using Control and Alt on my keyboard to size my brush on the fly. And if you don't like the circle that you made, you can try using the Bulge Brush with a pretty big brush, and that will kind of help to inflate that shape into a more smooth round shape. And if you want to move it around, you can use the layer adjuster black arrow to do that. And then the next thing that we'll do is we will create two new layers for the flower petals, and we will name them Petals. And then we'll go ahead and we will select a lavender purple color. It doesn't have to be the color that we stick with in the end, but we'll just use it for now with the scratchboard tool to fill in the petal shapes. Don't worry about getting them perfect because we can refine them later. We want the flower center to be on top of the petals, that way they overlap properly. And then just go ahead and fill them in. You don't have to worry about following your sketch exactly. You can change it a little bit. The sketch was just there to give you a feel for the proportions of the flower and where you wanted it positioned and things like that. But it doesn't mean that you have to try to stay exactly inside those lines. We'll move the Petals 2 below the Petals 1. We'll select a slightly different shade so that we can see it against the one we just put down. And then we'll put in the bottom petals. And then now you can really see this overlapping effect that we were going for here. And this is why we're using the multiple layers. So now that you've got it nice and filled in, if you want, you can move the sketch as the topmost layer, if that helps you. If not, you can just hide it like I did there. And then I'm creating a new layer for the stem on the bottom of all the other layers, and I'm picking a green, and of course using that scratchboard tool again. Now I'm making my brush the size of the stem that I want, and then I'm going to do a couple tries till I get it right. I'll go back to the petals layer, and then we will refine them a little bit using the pinch brush. Now the pinch does a good job of reshaping and smoothing. You may need to reduce the opacity if it's working a little too strong and make the opacity lower, but basically you just paint over the edge and that will smooth it out. You can kind of suck the pixels in towards the center of your brush using this pinch brush here. So I'm just going to go around all the edges, make sure they're not too rough, smooth them out. I'll go to the Petals 2 layer. You have to remember to switch back and forth between the two layers, of course, when you're painting these. And I'm just making sure that it looks nice and smooth and that there aren't any jagged edges that don't look nice. This petal here needs a lot of work, so pinch might not be the best for this. Instead of pinch, I'm going to use the Distorto brush, and that will let me push pixels around, kind of like finger paint. So I'm going to just use that to maybe even make some little dents in the leaves, because sometimes the leaves get broken or animals or insects will munch on them. You don't want to dent all the leaves, but you can vary your brush size with the Distorto to put in some little dents and notches and things in the leaves. And then I'll go through on all of the petals near the edges and just kind of scooch things in and make it look a little better. We'll go back to the center layer and we will turn on Preserve Transparency and we'll fill in with a better yellow color. We'll go to the Petals layer and we will fill those in with a better color too. I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard to sample that purple color and just make it a little more lighter and more pastel. Fill in the top petals, move to the bottom petals layer and go ahead and fill those in the same color. And then now I'll use a slightly darker color, shift it a bit towards blue, and then I'll use the airbrush to airbrush in some shading. Now this shading, it makes the petals look more realistic, but it also helps to separate the back petals from the front petals. So you'll want to kind of go along the edges of each of these. It also helps the petals look contoured because they're not flat, they're bent. And so putting these different shadow areas really helps them to look kind of curved and folded and things. So I'm doing that on all the petal layers, just kind of doing it by eye till it looks right. And then I'm going to use a lighter shade and shift that kind of towards pink. And I'm going to go along the edges and do what I like to call a rim highlight. And that's just painting along the very, very edge of the layer where it faces the light source to make the edge look like it's kind of sharper. Again, these aren't flat petals. They're kind of rounded if you think about them as a three-dimensional shape. So I'm going to add a little bit of darker color along the edges to, again, kind of add more contrast. Where that dark meets that light, it really helps the petals to stand out and look like they're more properly contoured. And it's these fine details that really make the piece stand out and look more realistic. Because if you don't do all this shading, your flower is just going to look like a paper flower rather than a real flower. And we'll add just a bit more shading just to bring it together. And then we can go ahead and move on to the center layer. And the center is kind of a half sphere, so we'll pick a darker orangish yellow color. And let's say our light's going to come from top right. So we'll put more shadow on the bottom left, and we'll just go right along the edge. We'll pick a lighter color, and we'll put that highlight in the top right, facing towards our light. And then now it looks more spherical in nature. We'll add a little bit more orange to the edge just to really make the edge stand out against the petals. It's important to have good contrast in that regard. We'll go back to the stem layer and we'll pick a dark color, maybe something darker than that we can see. And the petals are going to cast a shadow on the stem, so we'll put that in. And the stem is a cylinder, so we'll shade the left side. And we will add a highlight to the right side, and that really helps the stem stand out and look more natural. Then we'll go ahead and add a background in on the canvas layer. I'm going to sample that lavender color and the green color to get a feel for what our colors are on the color wheel, and then we're going to select a complementary color that is to a right angle of those colors, which ends up being blue. So we'll fill that with the paint bucket. And then we'll go ahead and shade the background a little bit using the digital airbrush, and we will use a pretty big airbrush with a darker blue color shifted towards indigo to paint in a nice soft gradient that goes from the top towards the bottom. We'll use a lighter color shifted towards cyan to put a lighter gradient on the bottom from the bottom to the top. And then we'll return to the center layer and we'll right click on it and select layer content, and we'll add a new layer. We'll make it a multiply composite method. Make sure preserve transparency is turned off, and then name the layer center texture. We'll use an orange color for the texture. We'll select square chalk and the paper that is called organismal texture bumpy skin. And you may need to modify the paper settings to what I have here. Then we'll go ahead and paint in a little dotted pattern using light pressure on the flower center. Then if you want to, you can go ahead and reduce the opacity to a better blend. Select none to make the selection go away. Turn preserve transparency back on. Hold shift to select both the petal layers and then group them with Ctrl G. Name the group Petals, and then we'll do select group content from the select menu. Open the group with the triangle, create a new layer above the group, and we'll name it Petals Texture. That can be a multiply composite method. Turn preserve transparency off and select a darker lavender color. Change your paper texture back to the default basic paper and paint with the sponge to add texture. Reduce the layer opacity to get a better blend. Go to the stem layer and do select none. You can go ahead and just turn preserve transparency on and just go ahead and paint with a darker color over the stem. It doesn't need its own layer. And then now what we can do is we can add a new layer under the center layer, which is going to be a multiply composite method. Take a darker violet color and the digital airbrush, and we'll go ahead and add a shadow that's being cast from the center of the flower onto the flower petals using this darker color. And I'll add just a little bit more, and I think that looks good. Then we can return to the petals group, do select group content again from the select menu, create a new layer in between the petals texture and the petals. We can hide the selection marquee from the select menu so that you don't see those annoying dotted edges. And then we will go ahead and put in some creases. Now these will be kind of lateral right down the center of each petal, and it'll make the petal look like it's kind of folded. There's a lot of flower petals that are like that. You can also use this same trick to put some different colors on the petals. We'll take a lighter color, and we'll want to make sure that the lighter color is on the side of the crease that faces towards the light, and that would be the opposite side of what you think it's going to be, because as the crease folds in towards the center, that side happens to be the left side of the shadow that you put in. We use the pinch brush to taper the edges. That kind of squeezes the pixels together. If you did the crease too thick, you can paint along the whole thing, but really just kind of helps to sharpen it and make it look more natural, as does reducing the opacity so that you get a more subtle blend. We'll create a new layer, we'll select white, and we'll use the airbrush to go ahead and paint. Our selection's still active, so it'll stay within that selection. And this will just be a way to add a little bit more of a bright spot to kind of help the petals pop out a little more and make them look a little more softer and more realistic. And then let's save a copy of our artwork so that we can go ahead and do a layers drop all and flatten all our layers. And then we'll use the blur brush and select none. Then we'll go ahead and blur the areas of the flower that are furthest away in focus. So you want to go along all of the edges, but especially the edges that are furthest away. Like for instance, where the petals overlap the stem, you would want the stem to be more blurry because it's further away in focus. This really just helps everything look more natural. Digital art has a habit of having too sharp of edges, and that just doesn't look good. You really don't focus with your eye on edges that sharply in real life. So here we have a quick little finished painting of a flower. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you'll join me every Tuesday for another episode of Draw This. If you liked this, take a quick second to click the like button, and click the share button and share it on YouTube or on Facebook, and also click the subscribe button so you can see my new videos as they're released. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.